everyone, and welcome to the Space Policy Show. I'm Vicki Woodburn, here with Colleen Stover.
Welcome.
And we are at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs Entz Center for the Arts. Colleen, can you tell us a bit about why we're here?
Well, Vicki, we are here for the third annual Value of Space Summit. Now, this is a partnership between Aerospace and Space ISAC that's been going on. It was originally inspired by a publication from the Center for Space Policy and Strategy called The Value of Space. So this year's summit kind of theme is sustaining value of space. Now, most people think that sustainability, space, these kinds of things are about protecting the space environment from debris to make sure that that environment is within operation. But not these people. They're taking it a different level.
Yeah, so this year they're looking at it through 4 specific lenses. So we first have the security lens. This year we're specifically focusing on cybersecurity and how that applies to the space domain. Then there is the financial lens, which looks at startups, cislunar development, and really the business case for space. We also have resources, and that can go a couple different ways. You can look at workforce development and the people resources, as well as things like supply chain risk management. And finally, there's the technology that enables this and makes all of this space exploration possible.
And let's not forget about the 5th lens, maybe the most important, policy, right? So looking at value of space and sustaining that all the way through. So I'm really excited about today's lineup.
Yeah.
As you can see, we're in the beautiful city of Colorado Springs. We've got a great backdrop and a great lineup of panels today. So we're going to bring you some of the tidbits from speakers today.
We're here for your behind-the-scenes look.
Thanks for joining.
I would like to ask you, Todd, pass it to you.
Well,
what is the value of space?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I tend to, from an ETG perspective, come at this with a...
What's ETG?
The Engineering and Technology Group. And we really look at, how do we solve our customers' hardest problems? And the one thing that is really consistent across that is that space provides these incredible capabilities. And now with the commercial industry doing what it's doing, we're starting to see an amazing opportunity where space is having an impact across, as you said, like electricity, like so many different sectors. So to me, that's where the value of space is.
Well, I think it's great. If we want to go down one level, we could say, the agricultural sector uses it. We get our weather information from it. Banking and finance uses it. Search and rescue uses it. Telecommunications uses it. So there's a long laundry list of things that space contributes to. And so I think that's the value of space. But writ large, I still think it's easiest just to say it's like electricity. Yeah. So there you go.
There you go. So Aerospace and the Space ISAC are partnering to put on this Value of Space Summit. It's the 3rd time that we've done this, the 3rd year we're doing it. And the reason that it's such a natural connection is the Space ISAC is out there to promulgate the really critical lessons learned and sharing information in the space cyber domain. And that's right up Aerospace's alley. We do that across the backplane for all of our customers, and so we really see this as a natural extension to take our stuff and move it and have greater impact into the community so that not only are we affecting national security space, not only are we affecting civil space, but we're getting this out to the broader commercial community, which I think is a perfect partnership between Space ISAC and Aerospace.
If I can chime in also, I think just kind of broadening what you just said is the Aerospace Corporation as an FFRDC,
yes,
it straddles commercial industry and government. And so we create this nice bridge between the commercial and the government sector. So I think it's a very useful place for Aerospace to be, helping the Space ISAC in their mission to help cross those stovepipes.
Absolutely. I think one other thing is the advent of our Commercial Space Futures Office and the opportunity that provides for new avenues for us to interact and connect are really, really exciting. So a lot of synergy with what's going on here.
So in my opinion, the most pressing issue being discussed today is really the value of space writ large. It is the Value of Space Summit. And it's based on our Center for Space Policy and Strategy Value of Space paper that helped create the theme for this summit originally. And so I think the value of space, but then also what are the threats to that value, and how do we sustain the value, and how do we do that as a community, and breaking down the stovepipes, getting people to work together out of their niche or out of their stovepipe, and figuring out the dependencies each stovepipe has and how those dependencies cross into other areas. And what do you think?
Oh, I think you hit right on it, and I'm going to talk about it from the, most people, space threats are kind of opaque, right? They're like, oh, I'm special snowflake. My system is, I developed it on this thing or this proprietary thing. It can't possibly be vulnerable. Space ISAC is and actually the Aerospace Sparta framework is giving techniques and procedures about how adversaries are looking at our space capabilities to attack them, and what are the mitigations. So I think, to me, is getting that out there is one of the huge things, but that is the most pressing issue today, but is totally in line with what you're saying, is like, operate as an enterprise. We got to share. We need to get intimate data sharing across so we can defeat the cyber and our adversaries writ large. So I think it's a really critical and pressing issue.
Well, if I could just piggyback on that briefly, was the information sharing is in the title of the Space ISAC, but as I mentioned today earlier, it's two sides of education is the other side,
Yes.
Two sides of the same coin. Education, raising awareness is also a purpose, I think, today.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Sure.
I have Sam Visner here from the MITRE Corporation. He's a tech fellow for MITRE, and he's also the ISAC's vice chair of the board. And so thank you for coming, Sam.
Thank you, Lena, for having me. And I'm grateful to be here at the Space ISAC's Value of Space Summit. Gorgeous facility, by the way, here at UCCS. Fantastic.
Well, thank you. We just had a panel that was about space infrastructure and looking at the opportunity to make space infrastructure the 17th critical infrastructure sector. And I wanted to know, how did these 16 critical infrastructures evolve?
These 16 infrastructures evolved over time. They started out with a national security directive, oh my God, some maybe 20 years ago, which was updated in the Obama administration with Presidential Policy Directive 21. But going back a little bit farther in history, this goes all the way back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when then President Kennedy needed some way to do risk management and to consolidate his ability to communicate during the Cuban Missile Crisis for our national defense, for national mobilization, and for the national economy. And over time, some of the sectors, communications, finance, built their own risk management structures with support from the government, with government points of contact. But it was PPT 21 that said, all right, it's time now to formalize this into 16 sectors. Today we're looking at whether or not an additional sector, space systems, should be critical infrastructure, as I believe strongly that it should be.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for that history lesson. So a lot of us don't understand that there are 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and that space is not indeed one of them yet. But what would be some of the benefits of making space a critical infrastructure, and what would be some of the challenges?
Sure, great question. So first, space has changed enormously. When PPD 21 was put out, and earlier in our history, we had a few space platforms with some very specialized missions. Today, we have thousands, maybe over 5,000 satellites in orbit. We're going to have tens of thousands of satellites in orbit doing everything from position navigation and timing, to remote sensing, to communications, to manufacturing, to cislunar operations, to space travel and colonization. That wasn't true 20 years ago. It's certainly true now. And therefore, it's overdue that we recognize that not only do we depend on these space systems, but more and more of our national and economic security is resident in these space systems. Now, the opportunity is for the government to build a consolidated programmatic infrastructure that gives industry a consolidated and coordinated way to work with government, and the government a consolidated and coordinated and efficient and faster way to work with the private sector on doing risk management. And that's important because most of these systems are now owned by the private sector. That's the opportunity. here's the challenge.
Right.
This is going to be hard work. As we say, you're going to have to go home and lose some sleep over this. Where will the policy come from? I would guess the National Space Council, which is developing policy now. Who will be in charge of putting together the programmatic infrastructure? Who will coordinate this sector risk management enterprise? How will responsibilities and then resources to fulfill those responsibilities be allocated across this programmatic infrastructure and architecture? That's going to be hard work. The opportunities of getting it are enormous because our adversaries are moving quickly and our process of sector risk management is clearly slower than our adversaries' ability to exploit our risks. So we need to catch up and surpass them, but getting there is going to be hard work.
Right, and so identifying space as the critical infrastructure sector will really help us get ahead of our adversary and provide us a space leadership role that the U.S. endeavors to be.
I absolutely think so. The United States has been a leader in space systems for a long time, and we've built in this country a strong entrepreneurial spirit that is allowing companies now to launch new commercial systems. And these systems are not only important for our economic security, but look at what they are, how important they are for our national security. And economic and national security today are pretty much converged. But take a look at our ability to meet our global commitments. In the Ukraine, for example, commercial satellite systems are providing a vital link for that country's ability to support the war and govern. And American companies like Maxar and Planet Labs are providing the sensory, the optical capability, the remote sensing capability, the imagery capability that is allowing that country to stay in the fight, which is something our country supports. So we need to be able to take advantage of America's leadership and strengthen that leadership with better sector risk management.
Well, Sam, that was well said. Thank you very much. And we look forward to more conversations on space as a national critical infrastructure sector. Thank
Been my
you.
pleasure. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In the panel that we just had on in-space servicing, assembly, and manufacturing, ISAM, I found it really interesting that we're starting to talk about how do we implement these ideas that have been talked about for a long time into the actual architectures today, right? How do we start to put these capabilities into the mindset of how we're planning to deploy assets in space, maneuver them, manage them, and ensure that they're more resilient in space? I found that a really interesting theme that came out.
I agree. I think as we look toward facilitating the ISAM ecosystem, one of the big challenges is going to be understanding how do we build our satellites differently so we can facilitate this modularity and really enable the ecosystem to do things like refueling or component replacement or even more minor repairs that need to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. The interfaces are a key question that we need to address, and something that I'm really happy that industry is starting to talk about more of what are the right interfaces, what are the smart interfaces, and how do we make sure that we're all interoperable in the way that we want to be to really achieve that next level that could be possible.
Absolutely. And I think as we had this conversation today, a lot of the conversation revolved around the cyber side of things, but across all of the different aspects of how we build satellites and how we architect our space ecosystem for the future, I think there is a huge need out there across industry for clear standards, clear rules, clear regulations, especially for the small businesses as they face their challenges with how to allocate their resources and especially how they decide what is worth investment. I think this panel really highlighted how exciting the future is with respect to all the different phases of ISAM. What do you think we can expect in the near term?
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to what we're able to enable. I think near term, we're going to be building out those abilities to do rendezvous, proximity operations, docking, right? That core capability set to enable servicing. And then it's going to be maneuvering spacecraft from one orbit to another, keeping them in their active slot if they're not able to do it themselves, refueling. Those are the services that I think in the next, say, 5 years, we're going to really develop our expertise in and the business case in, right? We need to have both of those at the same time. Beyond that, I think the spectrum is really broad as to what we could potentially do in terms of maintenance or augmentation. What are your thoughts on the beyond the 5-year sort of timeline?
I totally agree with everything you said about the near term. I also see beyond that many companies looking at doing things like in-space test beds, where we can prove out technologies that are maturing along the life cycle. And then I think really exciting would be considering the prospect of actually manufacturing satellites in space. Can we build that infrastructure where we are building satellites, building infrastructure, and not having to launch everything as a completed product?
Definitely, and especially if that would mean that we can have assets in space that are far larger than we could ever fold into a payload fairing. We're talking about tens of meters of large mirrors that would really enable that next generation of capabilities in space.
It's really exciting to think about how we can get rid of many of the constraints that are holding us back and limiting what we can do in space right now as these capabilities mature.
Yeah, opens up all the windows. It was also really exciting this year to see the National ISAM strategy come out, to see government place that pathway before us of what needs to happen and how industry can contribute to the goals of the government, to contribute not only to what's happening on the civil side, but also on the national security side, and really help guide us in this path forward on leveraging these capabilities. It's also great to see the FCC putting out their notice of intent so that we can look at how licensing is done for missions like this and really take that barrier out of play for companies that are looking to deploy ISAM capabilities. So I'm really excited to see this step from looking at the R&D side to actually implementing these capabilities, putting them into the architectures that we're building out and planning today.
That is very exciting, and I think this panel has really highlighted that we are very close to realizing a lot of these things that we were probably just dreaming about just a few years ago.
Yep.
Carolyn, thank you so much for hosting this panel today. It was a great discussion, and I think it did highlight a lot of really exciting things. Aerospace really appreciates the work that Astroscale is doing in this arena, and we are really looking forward to following all of those things as they continue.
Loved being a part of the conversation.
Today I came in at the request of the Space ISAC to run CyberStar. CyberStar is a game that was developed to teach about the importance of cyber in the role of space power projection. I've been teaching for over 20 years since I left the Air Force Academy in 2003 and taught here at UCCS for 15 years. And part of my teaching method is including games in the course. Games have the advantage of providing active learning. We learn better by doing, and also has the advantage that if the students didn't read the assignments or were unprepared, by virtue of doing the game in the classroom, then during the debrief, the hot wash afterwards, they would learn the concepts. So kind of eliminate the zombies out there trying to hide the fact they hadn't studied the night before, but also got students much more engaged in the classroom. This course, or I've developed many games over the course of the years. This one specifically uses cards and poker chips and lets participants behave as their own nations. And the objective of the game is for the nation to achieve predominance in space power projection after a simulated 10 years, 10 rounds in the game. The nation with the most space assets, satellites if you will, is the winner. However, other nations may want to thwart their attempts at becoming the predominant space power, and they may do that by using anti-satellite capabilities that they can purchase, or by using cyber capabilities that they can purchase. Through the course of interaction, of trading, and also forming alliances with other nations, the participants go through many interactions that eventually lead to one person in the end having the most space assets. through that interaction, they learn a lot of things. There are only about 4 or 5 countries that actually have ASAT capabilities. However, every country has cyber capabilities. The ASAT capability is only effective as a weapon against the space segment. Cyber capabilities are effective as weapons across all segments of space: ground segment, space segment, communication segment, what have you. Also, in addition, the cyber capability is also effective during all phases of a space program, from beginning to end. And these are the lessons that come out and during the course of the game that the participants learn. And to reinforce that afterwards, if necessary, I'll go through a debrief and a hot wash and ask questions that will bring those out. So the main thing is, not only do people learn, but they also seem to have a lot of fun in doing it. And that's something that I enjoy doing.
Talking about cislunar space, the whole volume extending beyond the distance to the moon, not just focused on the moon itself, but that 3D sphere going out beyond 400,000, 500,000 kilometers, a much vaster area, much more vast area than where we traditionally operate satellites in low Earth orbit or geosynchronous orbit. That might be in a region 10 times smaller in the radial distance.
And we're really interested in cislunar space as kind of that envelope that encompasses the lunar surface as well and the Earth, because it's an increasing area of interest for nations to travel. For example, NASA is returning to the moon and then onto Mars, and it's taking with it international partners and industry partners. And this has really spurred an enormous amount of interest in putting infrastructure in cislunar space and landing assets on the lunar surface. And for the first time, we're seeing private industry actors looking at landing rovers and hoppers and landers on the lunar surface. This is something we've historically thought about only nation states doing, so this is a very exciting, it's almost a revolution in cislunar space.
Yes, and with the flurry of activity, there's a desire to understand what's going on before you go and take your mission out to higher altitudes. It is physically the higher ground, and so there's a strategic component to getting into these unique orbits that are enabled by having the gravity of the moon affect your satellite motion. And so a key question that we're trying to help organizations answer is what is going on out there? How are objects moving around? Where are they going? Where can they reach with some maneuvering capacity? So being able to model that orbital motion, turn observations of objects into predictions for where they're going is a key question we need to be able to answer, a skill we need to be able to employ quickly to offer actors assurances in executing their missions.
And it's really, I want to emphasize this is a novel operating regime, particularly for NASA's industry partners. And not only are the astrodynamics and orbital dynamics novel for them to operate in and landing on another celestial body, but typically when we think about industry space actors operating in Earth's orbit, so low Earth orbit, mid-Earth orbit, or geosynchronous orbit, they have the benefit of a government service providing some level of situational awareness of the space objects around them. And as they move farther away from geosynchronous orbit into cislunar space, not only are they operating in this novel environment, they no longer have the benefit of that situational awareness service. And so we have to start to expand our concept of what is situational awareness, space situational awareness going to look like in cislunar space. How is that service going to be provided to our industry colleagues? And then when they reach the lunar surface, how are they going to know who's there with them? How are they going to know they're not going to interfere accidentally with the operations of someone just because they didn't know they were there? And so it's opening up a whole new realm of questions that need to be answered in the kind of policy and regulatory and best practice and non-interference environments that we really need to start addressing now to enable industry and ultimately NASA's successful lunar future.
Right, and there are at least two functions to that space domain awareness mission. There's the physical piece and the digital piece. So what are the sensor architectures that are going to enable us to collect the data to inform operators on what their position is, what else is out there, what collision risk is there, and then the digital piece, how do we pass that information around? What are the new standards for saying what our cislunar object catalog is? How do we describe those objects, their orbits, where they're headed, and with what level of confidence? And then, with that, we're stepping into other astrodynamic analysis functions to help answer some of these uncertainties in policies and standards. For example, do our collision risk algorithms work between halo orbits where the motion is more nonlinear than we're used to in evaluating that collision probability? What is the debris risk environment, or our standards for end of life of cislunar missions? So we step into trying to establish standards for propagating debris over time, propagate a satellite past end of life to figure out, is it going to be sweeping through GEO and posing risks to satellites? Is it going to be crashing into the lunar surface?
And not just sweeping through GEO posing risks to satellites or crashing into an uninhabited lunar surface, but we have to think about the potential impact of untracked debris in cislunar space on crewed missions. So crewed missions around the moon, crewed missions to the moon, human-tended or crewed bases on the lunar surface. Unaccounted for debris has the potential to be both unexpected and very dangerous to those missions. And so that is something we need to start thinking about. How are we going to minimize the creation of debris in cislunar space?
So we're talking about a lot of moving parts to bring these architecture solutions together for a sustainable cislunar ecosystem. And that's going to require interdisciplinary teams across engineering disciplines, not just aerospace engineering, but stepping into fields like cybersecurity.
Absolutely, and I think it's critical to remember that we really need to start implementing cybersecure systems for cislunar space and the lunar surface now, so that as that system evolves, we can ensure that in the future, when potentially semi-autonomous human-tended bases are supporting human lives, those networked systems really are secure to support those astronauts and keep them safe.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And it was great to attend the Value of Space Summit to talk about the integration of cybersecurity, astrodynamics, and all these other fields within the space enterprise.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
So sustaining the value of space, some would say it's a little bit of a loaded term, because it means so much, but you can unpack it. One way I like to think about it is, how are we ensuring the future of space enterprise, of the space market opportunities, really focusing on what is the business case for space. And that comes through all of the different dimensions that we discussed through, day 2 of the session yesterday, Value of Space 3, VOS 3. Really looking at cislunar. How do we better understand what are the market opportunities there? How do we build the technology to go to cislunar? How do we build the infrastructure to get there? What are the enabling policies, can't forget about policy, right? Technologies, influencers, even looking outside of the space market, but to other influencers, including, energy, transportation. Do they have any lessons learned from these other sectors? Because essentially what we're looking to do is everything we've built here on Earth, whether it be, infrastructure, the enabling infrastructure, or the policy dimension, all of these key factors, the norms, really what we're looking to do is translate that to space. And so it's really looking through all those different lenses that we discussed earlier, market economy, policy, technology, and the international dimension, really with international norms, to make sure that we're all really in lockstep, that we're going in the same direction, we have sort of the same vision, and we're not going sideways on certain things, because if we go sideways, we really won't be able to sustain sort of that longer term vision.
one of my biggest takeaways from Value of Space Summit is that when we titled it Space Sustainability, our goal going into the conversation was to get people to talk about cybersecurity as part of sustainability, because ultimately that's what our goal in Space ISAC is to share information about threats and vulnerabilities, and that leads to a conversation about sustainability. So if we can't protect our space systems, they're not sustainable. And I really walked away feeling like people are embracing this conversation, all aspects of it. They're willing to incorporate cybersecurity into their space systems curriculum in universities. They're talking about how the cislunar and the new emerging space industry has to adopt cybersecurity best practices, and we're looking at how to integrate space threat intelligence sharing with cyber threat intelligence sharing. So we're moving in the direction where it's not just a conversation like you're saying about normentum, or what is that word, Lori?
Normentum.
Normentum, yes, I love it. But embedded in normentum is cybersecurity norms and safety combined as one topic. And my next step from this is to really start to have that conversation from the top down, because we have a lot of people across the industry now who are concerned about this, and they've recognized to protect our space critical infrastructures across the world, from terrestrial impacts to space layer impacts to beyond, and our national security, we also need to have this conversation at a level higher. We need to be talking about what is the policy that we need to put in place to align our public sector partners to support the industry. As commercial leads out and we have a $1 trillion space economy, that's driven by the commercial sector. It's not driven by government. We have an inverse model now, and so that's where we're headed. Is we've got to start talking about this at a higher level and setting policy and direction.
I agree. And when you think about the future, we talked a lot about 2040 and what does space look like in 2040. This summit this week. But you also have to think about the next gen. And next gen, I always think workforce. And so we're doing a ton, locally here within Colorado Springs, across the country, even internationally, to make sure that we are, providing the tools, processes, information, technology that's emerging right now to students, in any capacity. Just so that we know that, because the future is about the workforce. And so making sure that they're aware, they're being creative in, decisioning processes, and creating sort of multiple paths, I guess, to get to the future. But then we can also make sure that we're developing the right criteria, but to better understand, well, what is the right future path if we can do that? So, yes, great.
Yeah, and so we have some other great next steps too. Space ISAC is running a tabletop exercise at AIAA Ascend, and one of the takeaways from the Value of Space Summit is we've got to put these things into practice. So we're seeing all of the different moving pieces going into practice because we're working these elements all at the same time, concurrently, truly. And I'm really looking forward to now including more of these aspects, looking at cybersecurity for the ground station as a service, including more contribution from government partners and the international community, and informing some of the future policy for space sustainability, including cybersecurity.
Right, and I think, on that point, thinking about some of the best practices, lessons learned that we've already gained going forward, that is part of our future vision, our future architecture. So making sure that we embed those across this lunar, as we move into all these different dimensions in space, that we're leveraging what we've learned. Don't let it go, but ensuring that it's baked in, across the acquisition lifecycle, the development lifecycle, things like that, in terms of technology, but also making sure that we're including policymakers. Legislation is going in the right direction, that we're moving, appropriately forward. So all of that.
Yeah, I really feel like the Cyber Vulnerability Lab that Aerospace has been helping Space ISAC design is going to help with this too, because we'll be able to partner with all of the vulnerability labs that maybe the Air Force has and the Space Force have and NASA have across the nation and industry. But in the Space ISAC Vulnerability Lab, we're looking at the commercial perspective and what does the commercial sector want to see for cybersecurity, and a lot of the threads from this summit we can pull right into that lab and start doing testing beginning next year.
Agree, and you make a good point that in some cases things have been built up separately than others in terms of different labs across different agencies. But how can Space ISAC use this, be the lever to knit those together, that they're sharing this information? So it's great that there are these separate, there's been the motivation to build these labs, but how do we knit them together sort of into a cohesive threat picture that becomes an opportunity picture for where we can go?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so looking forward to next year.
It's going to be fantastic. Boss 4, everybody should
Boss
be there.
4, we'll see you next year, same week.
Thank you everyone for joining today's Space Policy Show, our first ever on-location production. We are very proud to host experts from across the space sector. Aerospace made a big announcement about the launch of Sparta, an unclassified knowledge base of how cyber attacks could occur. It's specific to space. Listen now to Brandon Bailey to learn more and how cyber experts can even contribute their own TTPs.
So what is Sparta? Sparta is the Space Attack Research and Tactic Analysis matrix or framework. And it's really the first publicly available cybersecurity threat identification and response matrix to help spacecraft developers, owners, operators understand the space cyber threats that are out there and the mitigation. So in this high stakes, rapid transforming space economy that we're in, this matrix and framework will help enhance the likelihood of mission success by offering unclassified space cyber threat information to the United States government, commercial operators, and educate people on the defensive in-depth engineering that's really needed to ensure that we have a threat-informed, risk-based strategy for implementing cybersecurity on our spacecraft. Sparta includes the best practices from traditional cybersecurity matrices and frameworks that have been put out to date over the last 10 years. So what we've done is mimic the success of those cybersecurity matrices and frameworks, and we've also built this to include the tactics, techniques, and sub-techniques that can impact a space mission via cyber means. So these TTPs that we've identified have been proven out in laboratories, on-orbit experiments, exercises, as well as hacking workshops that may have went on at various hacking conferences and security conferences across the country. And we're really trying to focus on the art of the possible. What is in the realm of possibility as it relates to cyber attacks on a space vehicle? Because what we're seeing this information and communication barrier that's hindering the identification of these TTPs and sharing of this information in the community. And we're trying to address that by providing this first ever unclassified resource to educate space professionals out there. So we've taken information and aggregated it from unclassified research from academia, other FFRDCs, space cyber professionals, and put this single pane of glass together to really help educate the space community on these TTPs. And also focusing on the countermeasures. So many times what you'll see is people identify threat information as it relates to cyber, and they won't really focus and tell you how to mitigate and apply countermeasures. So what we're trying to do with the Sparta framework and Sparta in general is identify those countermeasures and best practices to mitigate these TTPs. So we're really trying to focus on raising that bar of what's considered space cyber common knowledge across the community and educate all the stakeholders so that we can engineer in these defense and death principles. So what sort of use cases do we think Sparta can really be beneficial for? So we've identified a few use cases where we feel like Sparta can really help. One area that we mentioned earlier was basically the space system developers, people who are building these spacecrafts. Now they'll have an understanding of what TTPs are out there, and they'll understand the countermeasures that they need to implement in the system through the design. Additionally, we feel like for organizations that have some sort of defensive cyber operation capability, so people that are monitoring their space systems for cyber attacks, they now have a framework that really focuses more so on the space segment. So they can accompany that with the monitoring solutions that they have for their terrestrial IT systems on the ground. And now they have a framework to help identify potential TTPs and attacks on the spacecraft as well. We also see benefit from a threat intelligence reporting perspective. So people who are performing threat intelligence collection, sharing of information, and distribution, we see benefit there, where you now have a framework that has unique identifiers for the different types of tactics, techniques, and procedures that may impact the spacecraft. You can now track those and report those and aggregate that data in a centralized format. We also believe from a assessment tabletop pen testing, red teaming perspective. So whenever you're doing cyber tabletops and these type of activities from an assessment perspective, having a unified framework and format that you can better go through the access vectors and execution vectors for an adversary. Now you have a list to pick from of the types of threats that you want to mimic in your assessments and tabletop engineering exercises. And then lastly, it's just education and knowledge in general, just raising that bar, common knowledge, like I said earlier, and really just understanding how to educate the community on how these attacks could happen. And we're actually looking for contributions as well as a part of this. So we've set up a listserv, sparta@aero.org, for emails if you want to contribute. Or if you want to learn more, you can go to the frequently asked questions section of the website. So the website is https://sparta, SPARTA @aerospace.org. There's all the information you needed on the website. There's a frequently asked questions area, and there's a link for contributions as well if you want to contribute your own TTPs or information into the Sparta framework. So we look forward to working with the community on advancing this as it will continue to grow as we mature it. And thank you very much.